Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Literacy View. This is really exciting tonight because for the first time, we have someone with us who is in government. And we have Assembly Member Bobby Carroll with us. On Twitter, he is known as Bobby for Brooklyn. And he has a nice following there. I've been following him, and it's really exciting what he's doing. Assemblymember Bobby Carroll is the leading literacy advocate in the legislature, a lifelong resident of Brooklyn. Yay, Brooklyn. He represents the 44th District in the New York State Assembly. His Dyslexia Task Force Act, which establishes an expert panel to create standards for universal screening for dyslexia, evidence-based literacy interventions, and professional development for teachers, is the first major piece of dyslexia and literacy legislation ever passed by the legislature. So welcome, and we can't wait to get down to it. So a lot of things are happening in New York. So Assemblymember Carroll, could you tell us a little bit about what's going on, all the exciting things that are happening in literacy?
Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be on your program. And there are a lot of wonderful things finally happening in New York State after kind of years and years of nothing happening. We've had a few real breakthroughs, and that's because of the advocacy, not just of myself, but of so many parents, advocates, teachers, and folks who've had literacy impact their lives, making it very clear that no longer could New York State be in the background and not do something for the thousands and thousands of children who are being hurt by our literacy crisis. The two most important things that have happened in the last month are the governor finally signing my Dyslexia Task Force bill and making it law so that we're going to have finally public hearings. We're going to require the state education department to come up with best practices for screenings, for interventions for children with dyslexia, as well as some best practices for teacher training. And that's going to be impactful. And I think it's going to bring together some folks who have previously been resistant to change and resistant to mandates. And I think we've created a broad tent there. So I'm excited to see that happen. I'm excited to also hear from people who've struggled with dyslexia, students, teachers, parents, administrators, experts, to be able to come out to these public hearings and tell their stories, because I think they will be illuminating for folks who don't realize how broad our literacy crisis is in America, as well as folks who maybe have never experienced what it means to struggle to learn how to read, or to schools that are struggling to teach students. The other exciting thing that has gone on is the governor announced last week, and will announce in her State of the State, that she's going to put $10 million towards micro credentialing at SUNY and CUNY, as well as try to codify standards around literacy through the state education department. I'm proud to say that those ideas and those policies come out of a bill of mine called the Right to Read Act, which is very similar to some other bills that have been passed throughout the nation. Most of them also called the Right to Read Act. And so there's a huge coalition here. And I think that this is my beginning of my 8th year in the legislature. When I first was elected, I was one of maybe 2 people who was talking about this subject. Now we've got folks in the legislature, that is. Now we have folks throughout the state assembly and Senate talking about it. We've got the chancellor of the New York City Public Schools talking about it. We've got finally the state education department chancellor, Betty Rosa, talking about it. And so now we have to do some action. We can't just be talk. And so very, very excited to be on this podcast, because it's people like yourselves who've actually done the hard work of laying the ground for people like myself and others to build on top of.
Well, it's so interesting because, as you said before, there really wasn't much happening for so long. And Judy Boxner and I have been in education for many years. And it just seemed crazy that so many states were looking at literacy and doing things about it, but New York State seemed to just lag behind. And finally, it seems like things are catching on. Bobby, what do you think? May I call you Bobby?
Call me Bobby, Faith.
Okay. What was the turning point? I think people are curious to hear what exactly was the turning point, because we have an audience from all over, and I think they're interested to know, how did this happen and what could they possibly do to make things happen as well?
So it's a great question, Faith. And there's never one specific thing where you go, oh, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. But I do think that there is one thing that I personally did that really impacted this day. When I was elected to the legislature, I made literacy a focal point of the work I do in Albany. And I made it a focal point because I struggled when I was a child. I struggled with dyslexia, and I was lucky that at the end of the first grade at PS 230 in Brooklyn, my teacher identified me as likely to have dyslexia because she was well trained, and she went to my parents. She didn't wish it away. She didn't say, well, Bobby's a boy, or he's young for his age. He's born at the end of October, or he's so chatty and talkative. He must eventually get this. No, she said, I suspect that your son is struggling with dyslexia. This doesn't add up. And my parents then had the means and the opportunity to take me to Columbia University Medical School, where I got a neuropsychological evaluation, and it answered what they suspected, that I was struggling with dyslexia and dysgraphia. And then another bit of luck happened. I had a really tenacious mother who went out to figure out, what am I going to do for my young son? And in the middle of second grade, I left PS 230 for the Gateway School, which at the time was on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. And then for middle school, I went to the Windward School. And both of these were private schools that focused on remediating dyslexia for children. It was a alienating and very painful situation when I was a young person. I didn't like being the only kid from Brooklyn at both of those schools. I didn't like leaving my neighborhood, but it changed my life. And it allowed me to be a successful student and then a successful adult. And I realized that in politics and in government, 9 out of 10 times, elected officials, wherever they're from, whatever role they're in, usually they can only make 1 or 2 decisions or 1 or 2 choices. They're usually relatively the same, but you can pick an issue or two and say, I'm going to break the mold here. I'm going to be heterodox. I'm going to say the emperor has no clothes. And I decided it for this issue. And so it took a lot of work to get the legislature even to just pass the Dyslexia Task Force. And they did it for the first time in 2022. And when the governor vetoed it, I was not happy. And I went ballistic. And I wasn't very nice to the governor. I wasn't very nice to a lot of her staffers. I wasn't nice to a lot of people. But I made it very clear. I said, look, I'm willing to work with you. We broke bread, but I said, we've got to do this and we've got to get this done. And I think if you want to change anything, you have to set reasonable expectations and goals, and then you've got to just be laser focused on them. There's multiple bills. We've got 3 other bills that we want to pass. The Dyslexia Task Force is very much the first step of those 4 bills. There's 3 more. But we knew that we needed to take that initial step. And we knew that we also had to be laser focused and say, this is important and it's worth, hurting feelings. It's worth breaking some eggs. And so we were focused. I was heterodox. I was annoying. I was, completely, I didn't care whose feelings I hurt. I didn't care what special interest groups may or may not have liked it, because there were a bunch of special interest groups that did not like the bill and still don't like the bill. But I realized that it's a crime that in the richest country in the world, we have, in New York State, depending on which statistic you want to read, either 50% or 70% of our fourth graders don't read at a proficient level. Either one is criminal. And as somebody who could have had the gift of reading and the ability to self-actualize stolen from it, and the fact that I was given that gift, and I realize how amazing that gift is, I refuse to kind of pay lip service to people who are uninterested in solving this unbelievable problem and this unbelievable stain on our public education system. Because our public education system should be great, and it should be a place where kids from all over, with all types of backgrounds and all types of issues and problems, are able to get a sound basic education. And it starts with literacy. It's not the only thing, and it doesn't solve all problems. There's a diversity of problems in our schools. But if we can't focus and say that that should be one of the main priorities of our school system, I don't know what we're doing.
Well, Judy, you just heard it. I mean, don't you think that? Cheers? I think so.
I was thinking the same thing.
Absolutely. That deserves cheers. That
Well,
was beautiful.
And Faith and Judy, we're all from Brooklyn, right? I mean,
Exactly.
you need to be a little obnoxious sometimes. You need to be in people's, I like people from Brooklyn. I get people from Brooklyn.
And we get you.
And that's what you need to do sometimes. You're not being mean, you're not being rude, you're being direct. And we need that, right? I'm sure both of you agree that we need explicit instruction. Sometimes you need to be explicit in what you want to get done. And that's what I was.
Judy, jump in. What do you think?
Wow, I was just taking a power nap because I just came home from, the conferences in New York City, everyone reading. And, I was tired, but boy, did I wake up. Thank you, Bobby. Bobby, our guy, Faith, you knew it. Leslie Lord knew it. We got the right guy on the show. First of all, it's amazing. This is our first episode with 3 Brooklynites. That's like epic.
Yeah. And sometimes people just don't get it because we actually have a BS button, Bobby. We call BS on a lot.
We're not going to push it though. Don't push it.
And I have to tell you, we're very direct. If we think something is BS, the BS radar comes right up. We're from New York. We just get it and we'll say it like it is. Anyhow, Judy, do you have any thoughts about or questions for Bobby before I jump in? I have some things that are on my mind. What do you think?
So Bobby, I'm working in the New York City schools. This is my 26th year. We've been seeing that literacy has been a mess for a very, very long time, and it's just been stagnant. It's almost like life stood still for a while. It was just the same old thing, and kids not reading and using things that weren't evidence and research based. Now things are shifting, but I still see that there's a lot of kids that are still struggling, and possibly some kids in the city or where I live are not getting the level of support that they need. Are things going to start moving quicker? Because I definitely think there's definitely some dyslexic kids probably within the city that aren't being identified quick enough and are not getting, the help that they need ASAP.
Yeah, well, look, I agree, Judy. First, there definitely are a lot of kids in New York City public schools who are dyslexic, who are not getting identified in the supports that they need in probably almost every single school in the city, and in some schools, probably record amounts. I'm of two minds of it. I gotta first give Chancellor Banks credit where credit is due. The first thing he did when he was named chancellor was he went to the Windward School with me. The very first thing he did, and we did a tour for a full day and talked about literacy. And he has centered literacy, during his administration. That doesn't mean everything he's done is perfect, but I can tell you, as somebody who's dealt with a lot of chancellors before, he's the only one who got it that said, look, if we're not doing literacy right, we're not doing anything right. And so I have to give him a lot of credit. I will, though, also say that, as somebody who comes to this battle as a person who struggled with dyslexia, and as a person who's got a 15-month-old, and my wife is the opposite of dyslexic. I hope he's more like her when it comes to reading, at least, than me. But we know that it's hereditary, and I know are. I want to create a system, and I want to work with Chancellor Banks, where if my son or daughter struggles with dyslexia, they can still go up the block and get the services at their local zone public school. And I don't think we've gotten there yet. I don't think we've gotten there because it is an intensive change that we need to do. I respect Chancellor Banks' movement towards evidence-based reading curriculum throughout our gen ed schools and the 2-year process that is taking. He and I have done some literacy grants specifically for schools inside my district, 3 schools in my district, where we have tried to get more evidence-based training for teachers. I think that's all wonderful. And I think it's really, really impactful. But I do think we need to come up with a systematic plan, which I think the Dyslexia Task Force will help public schools do, which says, how do we identify kids early? And when I mean early, I mean kindergarten or first grade, really. We know that we can do it. How do we do it effectively? How do we do it fairly? And then how do we make sure that these interventions that it's not just kind of lip service? Okay, we're going to label Johnny as dyslexic, which just means we're going to label that we don't think he can accomplish much. We have lower expectations for him. What we need to do is, if we're going to give a kid that label, it's now we're going to give you the skills and the tools to succeed, to flourish. And that's a big step. And I think one of the simplest ways, one of the things that we have in my Right to Read bill are making sure that we have one reading teacher per school per 100 children. That is money well spent. My mother was kind of traumatized by my experience in education. So she went back to school, got a master's degree in literacy, and was a reading teacher at PS 372 in Brooklyn for 17, 18 years. And she paid it forward that way. There's so many wonderful teachers in the DOE who have unbelievable training. We need to now put them in the right roles. And we need to, if we don't have enough reading teachers, we need to also actually prioritize in our budget that reading teachers, if you teach a young person to read, so many of the other social ills that are going on in our society start melting away, right? If I hadn't been able to read, look, I probably drop out of high school. I don't know what I do. I might have some amazing Horatio Alger story and, come up with some amazing company or do some amazing thing, and someone gets to put a feel-good piece about me in 60 minutes. But more likely is I end up doing a job that I can maybe barely scratch by. And there's nothing wrong with those jobs, but it's sapping the potential of so many kids, especially in New York City, where, if you're born in New York City and you're given a decent education, the world's your oyster. But if you can't read, it just doesn't matter. So, I mean, we have to do a lot more. We have to prioritize literacy, and we do have to keep remembering those kids who struggle with dyslexia, because they were the canaries in the coal mine. They're why so many parents were screaming up and down and shouting about the literacy crisis, not 10 years ago, not 15 years ago, 20, 30, 40 years ago. The Gateway School is about to have its 50th anniversary. Those parents were trailblazers. Those parents said to a system, my kid can learn, and my child does have potential, and my child can be a successful student. You're not going to deny him or her of that. And, so sometimes people, as if this crisis is only because of Lucy Calkins or the last 20 years. This has been an ongoing problem, and it's, I think, up to us to solve once and for all. And we can't forget those children who have struggled and who've been harmed the most by all of this, which are children who struggle with dyslexia.
So, Bobby, I actually wrote a book about my experiences. I've been in education for 35 years. So I've seen this, and it's called Failing Students or Failing Schools, a parent's guide to reading instruction and intervention. So just to tell you what you're saying, I lived for years. Judy has seen it as well. I mean, both of us have been in education for a long time. So my question to you is, Governor Hochul, Kathy Hochul, said that she's going to try to ensure that scientifically proven methods will be happening in all schools by September 2025. What will that look like? So we're talking about tier 1 instruction, I'm sure. That means that all kids will receive evidence-based instruction. And how will that be enforced?
Well, that's you hit on it there. How is it enforced? First, look, I got to give Kathy Hochul again, where I said you got to give credit where credit is due. Give credit to David. I give big credit to David Banks. I also have to give some big credit to Kathy Hochul for, we were at loggerheads for a while, but now, we are working together hand in glove. Got to, applaud her big step in not only signing the task bill, but coming out and putting in her state budget mandates for the science of reading instruction. We first have to pass it, right? So we got to either pass it in her budget, which is a bill that she presents to the legislature in April, or we have to pass a bill, a similar piece of legislation as a standalone bill, which would be my Right to Read Act. Either one, there is a problem always in government with mandates, right? You can say the mandate, you can even put in, money or incentives to try to push the mandate along. But eventually, government is easy to make mandates, easy to spend money, hard to sometimes enforce them, right? I think people remember, No Child Left Behind. I was looking at something today, mandated something like by 2014, no child, every fourth grader will be at grade level or something like that. So I do think goals are important. I do think that the science of reading and evidence-based reading techniques and looking at the 5 pillars of literacy, looking at sequential and systematic and structured phonics approaches that are done with fidelity. I think all of these are well intended and good pieces of public policy. And it's great to finally hear all types of leaders talk about this and not, kind of hold back language techniques that were so detrimental. But it will take teachers and parents and policymakers to continue advocating and watching and making sure that the education department and superintendents and chancellors and principals are actually implementing these pieces of policy with fidelity. I think one of the things that's so difficult about the whole language debate is that whole language feels really good. It feels right. It's easy to explain. And so when a principal or a superintendent goes into a bunch of young parents who are just excited to see their kids go to school for the first time, kindergartners, first graders, and they kind of say, we're going to center your child's education and we want them to love school and love learning and love reading. And we're going to make this, fun, and we're going to, make this child focused. And we have these techniques that, early on, whether it be 3Qing or something else, makes the kids feel like they're progressing quicker. It's a very evocative thing to say versus somebody who says, we are going to systematically try to teach your children to read, and it can be a little bit slower and it can be a little more daunting. Not that children need to, know all the ins and outs of the English language or the phonology and morphology of everything. They don't, but their teachers do. And their teachers need to be systematic, and their teachers need to have a structure, and it needs to be cumulative and build on it. And so we desperately need leadership. We desperately, I have teachers come into my office all the time who are experts at teaching children how to read, and they have the training. And sometimes their schools want to implement evidence-based curriculums, and sometimes the principals and others are resistant to it, which is, again, why David Banks, I've got to give him big credit, and we would not have gotten where we are today with the Dyslexia Task Force and with what the governor's announcing without him. And I take some credit in getting him there. You know, I've had lots and lots of conversations, and he and I really see eye to eye on a lot of this stuff. But he plowed a lot of ground by making it very clear that there was a new day. What we need now is laws that parents, and part of those laws can also be reporting requirements, so you know what kind of curriculum is going on, and you can require school districts so that, you know, parents shouldn't have to be experts in literacy to make sure that their young children learn. But policymakers, educators, we are going to need to stay vigilant.
Yeah. Interesting.
Wow.
Judy and I were just having this conversation when we saw each other at the Everyone Reading Conference. And it came up, Judy, how we were talking about assessments and how, you know, not all the information goes home to parents, that sometimes they're not getting it in a timely way, or they're not getting the full picture with the graphs. We just recently had this conversation. So, you know, listening to what Bobby is saying, how do you think this all plays out in the New York City schools in terms of making sure that parents get the information so that they could then stay on top of these things? They don't have to be experts, but they have to have some knowledge. And, you know, they have to understand how to look at an assessment and the results, correct? What are some of your thoughts about that?
So the first thing I want to say is, Bobby, you definitely know literacy. You know, when you have a politician coming on, whether it be a Republican, a Democrat, you're like, I don't know if this person's going to be lip service. This is not lip service. You could tell that you're really passionate about literacy instruction and making
100%.
sure all kids could read. One question before I answer that question. Can I ask one question?
Of course, go ahead.
Yeah.
So probably at the government level, you're probably working with Republicans, Democrats, and so forth. Do you see that this issue is a unifying issue for all parties as of now?
That's
Yes. So it passed unanimously. The Dyslexia Task Force passed unanimously in the legislature because it's a unifying issue. We also passed unanimously in the Assembly, but not in the state Senate, a bill, my Dyslexia Diagnosis Act, which would get private insurers to pay for at least part of neuropsychological evaluations in private insurance policies, and that passed unanimously. So I think it is, and I think we've seen.
What about mandated curriculum?
Look, mandate. So that's what my Right to Read Act is, which is, you know, mandating evidence-based literacy curriculum, and goes a couple of steps further than what the governor announced. You know, it's an uphill battle. I will say that, look, red states and blue states have passed right to read legislation. Red states, to be fair, red states have passed more comprehensive legislation than blue states. But I think there's a couple of reasons for that. You know, to be perfectly blunt, you know, in Mississippi, which is the kind of held out as the trailblazer here, you know, there are less folks in the room that you have to convince that this is a good idea. And what I mean by that is, like, you know, there's not a large teachers union that you have to convince. There's not a large state education department. There's not there's not huge, different kind of, we have so many different education advocacy groups in New York. I think every single one of them should be focused on literacy first. I do think at the end of the day, you can say we all have a lot of priorities. There's a lot of things we want our kids to learn, but I can be very clear. I think the first thing we need to make sure that they learn is learn how to read. And so it is difficult. It's also, look, as you said, look, I care about this because it happened to me. And I wouldn't be being a good advocate if I didn't know how to speak about it. If I just told you a sad story about getting on a bus at 6 a.m. in Windsor Terrace, Brooklyn, and going up to the Upper East Side and feeling alienated. Great. Lots of people can tell you a sad story. Doesn't solve anybody's problem. And it's not about me, right? The selfish thing that I do is that I have a hunch that my kids might have the same problem. So I'd like their life to be a little bit better. And I'd like other kids not to have as crummy a time as me. That's the selfish part of me. And what we need more people in government to be a little bit selfish. We need people to say, look, this is a crummy thing to do to somebody, or this is a crummy thing to happen. Let's fix it so this crummy thing doesn't happen again, instead of the kind of usual self-aggrandizing that both Democrats and Republicans do quite often and quite well. So I do think there's some real bipartisanship, because we all have kids, we all have friends, we all have relatives who've had this struggle. And I think one of the good things about it being 2023 and not 1993 or 1973 is that people talk about it more. And people talk about what's happened to them, and people talk about this. And so, before I got into the state legislature, I didn't talk about the difficulties that I had as a kid. I talk about them because I think it's my responsibility, not because I like to do it. And it's my responsibility, again. 9 out of 10 people who have the same job as me, who represent the same kind of constituents as me, would do the same thing, except for this. And so I think that this is a place where I can actually make some change. And so, and I'm glad to see that both Republicans and Democrats so far have been open to that. We've got a long way to go in New York. Some other states are still way ahead of us. So I hope my colleagues are willing to take some bigger steps in the next few years.
A lot of people try to make it an issue with Democrats against Republicans and making reading politicized, looking at it like only one side would believe in this structured approach and another one is for the children or for the teachers, and they make it so that it's more attractive to be in the other camp. And this has been going on for a while, and I'm sure you've seen it on Twitter as well. And it's really, bunch of BS. And it's so refreshing to hear an authentic voice say something like that. And what I think is really cool about you, Bobby, is that you can empathize because you've been there. And I do find that people who experience this, you in government or district officials, administrators, teachers, the people I've met who seem to be the most proactive in this have a personal connection to the issue. Either they struggled, or their children have struggled, or a family member has struggled in some way, and they are really, passionate about turning this around.
Yeah, look, I mean, because I feel, I know what it's like to be those 7, 8, 9-year-old kids that not only can they not quantify exactly why they're struggling, and that it feels so unbelievably, kind of large and seismic, that they don't know, where that journey will end. But I mean, I feel for them, because so often it seems like there are people around them ready to give up or ready to have lower expectations. And I that's the thing that makes me, saddest or most frustrated, is that, these kids have such potential. And that's not potential in a, some feel-good way. Real potential to be successful, to have agency, to self-actualize. And unless the adults in the room get their act together and say, let's figure out how to teach these kids and give these kids the opportunities so that they can decide what they want to do, we're completely failing them. And we've failed so many kids. And, it's just terrible. And it's terrible when you see kids who they know they're smart, but they don't feel like they're getting any opportunity. And so they go, well, look, maybe I'm just some dumb kid with dyslexia, and let me try to pretend I've got some other trick up my sleeve, and kind of write off the whole idea of education, or write off the whole idea of success. And you see it, and you see that. I don't often quote George W. Bush, but he was 100% correct when he said the phrase, the soft bigotry of low expectations. I remember to this day people talking in hushed tones about me when I was 7, 8, 9 years old, and not any ill will, but low expectations. And it's a terrible thing. And we shouldn't do that to 8-year-olds.
Judy, I read in that article. I'm sorry.
I apologize that I went a little bit off track on the last question that you posed.
It's okay. It's all right. You know what? I think that Bobby is wowing us, and it's like there are so many things going on in our minds listening. So I get it. Governor Hochul proposes to really make this a priority, and she said that $10 million will be going to this. That doesn't seem like an awful lot of money. Judy, I mean, you're in the city. I worked in the city. By the way, Bobby, I worked in District 22. I didn't mention that before, but that was where I started my teaching career before I moved to Long Island. I'm thinking that doesn't seem like a lot of money at all. Do you think this is just painting a picture? Or do you think that, that we're going to see something really happen? Just your thoughts in terms of what you're seeing now.
Look, you were right, Faith, that our education budgets are mammoth in New York, and $10 million is a drop in the bucket, but it's a start. And I think it's really, without getting into the weeds about the governor's budget, I think it's really about this micro-credentialing program and creating and starting then to require curricula changes throughout the state. Some of that would come from local dollars. Some of that would come from dollars that are already allocated to local school districts every year. So these things can get a little bit murky. I think less is the focus on money, which I think is one of those things that, too often we ask politicians or policymakers to just say, well, get me money, right? Whatever the problem is, just get a bunch of money. And if then you give it to the people who are supposed to then administer the service, they'll figure out all the rest. And sometimes that's the right policy, but oftentimes it's not always the right policy. I'm pro getting our schools lots of money and making sure they're fully funded, but I'm also pro making sure that they're, using that money in the wisest way, and using, correct pedagogy and curriculum that is evidence-based. And so what we need, what the governor has done that is powerful is the fact that she has started the conversation. She has said that we are going to train more teachers in evidence-based techniques and curricula, that we're going to do it through the SUNY and CUNY system so that we are able to reach as many teachers as possible. We got a big state. You got folks in Western New York, you got folks out on Long Island, New York City, up in the Adirondacks, Finger Lakes, all over. And so we need to make sure we get those resources out. We need to make sure we get this training out there. And it's not all going to happen overnight. And of course, we have a bunch of teachers already who do have some great training and have some great ability. We need to unleash their potential. We need to make sure that they're given the supports that they need. And I'm excited that, we're there. New York has never lacked for finding money for programs that it likes. So you know what? If we can get this off the ground and people can get behind it and it's working, we're going to find a way to make sure that we train these teachers. We're going to find a way to make sure schools get the curricula and the materials that they need. You know, one of the things that I would love to see the governor do, and I've suggested to her, is that look, there's lots of schools that unfortunately went out and spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on books and readers that are from Columbia University, Teachers College, or from Fountas and Pinnell, and we need to exchange these books, right? And so I would love to see a grant to schools to say, look, if you've got Lucy Calkin readers or you've got Fountas and Pinnell readers, we'll get you decodable texts. We'll do a one-to-one exchange, or we'll do, there's a lot of things we can do. We do have real resources in the state. And it's also, but I agree with you, Faith, that like 10 million's a drop in the bucket, and we don't want it to look like lip service where, we do it in one school here or there and we say problem solved, mission accomplished.
Yeah. Judy, what would next steps look like? What do you think? What if you could just, make it happen as a coach? What would you need? What would you need to make this happen?
So, a lot of us are very, very, we're excited, but still skeptical, when you read the newspapers and stuff, it still says, oh, the city schools are going to be hit with $500 million cuts. And that's kind of weird, right? Because right now we're trying to do everything positive, get more resources into the schools. And when you hear about cuts and, you hear that the schools are having trouble keeping up with migrants, you're like, how is that going to, impact literacy instruction? So it's, sometimes it's hard to be so positive. A lot of the coaches that were working for a team called Universal Literacy, which was also a team prior to, Chancellor Banks, we were already starting the footwork of bringing phonics into the schools. We were getting letters trained. Many of us were getting Orton Gillingham training. We were meeting people like Anita Archer. So a lot of that stuff was happening prior, but then things took a turn and a lot of us coaches were no longer coaches. Luckily, many of my friends are now reading interventionists. I actually went back to being an in-house coach in one building. So that was kind of like, for some of us, like a little bit of a red flag, because you're saying everything's going to improve. You're saying there's going to be more help in the schools, but right now, not every school has a coach. Some people do. There's something called phase 1. So some schools are getting phase 1 support, but there's not really a coach that's positioned in every building. A lot of these coaches are now either at Central or at a district office. So how much support are our teachers really getting with rolling out the curriculum? A lot of teachers want more support. My principal decided coaching was important and we have an in-house coach. Not every school does. In terms of reading specialists, there's about 100 of them, but I think that there's probably thousands and thousands and thousands of kids that are struggling. So I think it was smart to roll out something on a smaller scale, right? We have to see if the interventionist work is showing positive data shifts. But is the help really getting to all the teachers that need help right now? Is the help really getting to all the students that need help right now? I don't know. And then that 10 million bucks doesn't sound like a lot. So I got to be honest. I think a lot of teachers, based on feedback that I'm seeing online and on threads and people that I meet, still want more resources in their hands. I still see level libraries all over the city. So I think, and also one thing I have to bring up, and I'm not embarrassed to bring it up because I'm a no BS kind of lady, city schools still have their rating system aligned to running records and F&P.
Yeah.
That is a mixed message. We just went through a time when the contract just expired. And I was almost sure that that was going to be something that was going to be revamped or looked at. But if we're still measuring teacher ratings based in some schools, not all schools, on running records, how does that align with the science? So I guess I'm a little bit optimistic because I think mandating curriculum is the best thing that ever happened, but I'm still concerned. Is that fair?
Look, I think it's more than fair. I think, look, of course, I think one of the biggest problems that, everybody does, but politicians are the worst at, are, kind of, putting out press releases, doing something, and then pretending as if they just snap their fingers and everything changes overnight. And I think not only is that disheartening to teachers, and my mom was a public school teacher, it's also disheartening to parents and kids who are struggling, who go, okay, the governor, this is a powerful person, the mayor, the chancellor, they just all said this. So this must mean my kid's now getting the resources he or she needs. And so, I mean, I would love to see teachers. I mean, that's why in our right to read bill, we mandate a reading interventionist per every 100 kids at every school. I don't think we put a reading coach in every school, but we probably should say that there should be a coach and then interventionist so that, there's an expert teacher there to kind of make sure that all of this is being done with fidelity, that classroom teachers are also getting supports that they need. I would love to see teachers to be able to come out and say, because the New York City public school system is so large, so diverse, and has unique issues, to say, look, this is how we think we can, solve this problem, while accounting for the issue that, yeah, there is a migrant crisis going on. Yeah, we've got schools where lots of children have housing instability. Yeah, we've got schools where, there are 5 or 6 or 7 or 10 languages other than English spoken at home, and almost no kids speak English at home. Or we've got, deep and structural poverty issues in certain schools, right? It is easy. I understand that, what's good for a kind of high resource district school is very different than what's good for a school that is low resourced or low income, or English isn't spoken at the homes of children. And so I think we desperately, I can't account for what the mayor or the chancellor's budget's going to be, and I would hope. I think of the state budget. I don't think we're going to see cuts to the state education portion of school funding, and I'm hoping we'll see some modest increases. But I would love to see the mayor and the chancellor figure out a way, and I'm still optimistic that they will, to at a bare minimum, hold schools harmless. We know that there were real issues with learning loss during COVID-19, and issues around getting kids back into the building, and we're still trying to figure that out. And Chancellor Banks and Mayor Adams, and I applauded them for doing this big overhaul in curriculum, but there's still a long way to go to really perfect this. I mean, your point about running records, you're not the first person to bring that up to me. We should be doing everything we can to actually right this ship. And I'll say it, like, again, in a budget, you got to prioritize. Let's prioritize our schools, because Eric Adams and David Banks, if they help fix this problem and they really right the ship of literacy in New York City, where we go from 56% of kids reading below grade level to, 75, 80, 90% of kids being proficient, that will be their legacy item, period. There is nothing else they could do that would be more impactful. It is impossible. And it's a huge task. That's not an easy thing to do. But to do that in the next 5 to 6 years would be life-changing, life-altering. And the amount of businesses, the amount of, amazing things that you would help stop cycles of poverty, cycles of depression, cycles of crime, cycles of all types of things. If you ride the ship, it would be so impactful. I would urge them. There will be cuts in the city budget. Again, I think the state budget is much better than the city budget. There are going to be cuts in the city budget, and I get that that's hard, and the mayor and others have to figure that out. But you do have to prioritize, and I think our public schools, we should hold out as a place where we should really try to protect those budgets, especially our elementary schools and middle schools, where we're trying to really change and do big change over these next 2 to 3 years.
So you mentioned SUNY and CUNY. So people listening out there, that is the state university system of New York. CUNY is the city university system of New York. And you mentioned that, one of the goals would be that all the colleges, the universities are going to start teaching, in the teacher education programs, all about evidence-based instruction. But we have a lot of people in SUNY and CUNY with tenure. And, they've been teaching a certain way for a long time. So again, how does that get enforced? I feel like I keep asking the same type of thing, but it all sounds good. But
it's a micro, what the governor has suggested, right? And this isn't law yet. All she's done is made an announcement, right? We have a long way from her announcement to it being enacted. But Chancellor John King, the head of SUNY, who is a really great guy, we're lucky to have him as the chancellor of SUNY, is a ardent supporter of the science of reading and a passionate advocate for literacy education. He has already created a micro-credentialing program at SUNY New Paltz that just started this fall in their micro-credentialing program. That work is kind of what the governor is building off of. So I don't want to suggest that at every single teacher's graduate program in SUNY and CUNY that there is going to be complete fidelity to the science of reading. I do know that Brooklyn College, where my mother got her graduate degree, has got a very good reading program, because people from Brooklyn know when they're being sold a bill of goods. They didn't have to go to Columbia to be sold a bunch of snake oil. They stayed in Brooklyn and figured it out. But so we've got great schools at CUNY and SUNY. We have some great programs. I agree that, look, there are people, as a person who struggled with dyslexia, look, I don't want to diagnose any more people with dyslexia than we have to. But I can't tell you how many times I get frustrated with people who like to pretend that dyslexia doesn't exist, that it's a make-believe thing, or it's a thing, it's a magic feather that parents like to use to make their kids feel good. Promise you didn't make me feel good when I was 7 years old. And I promise you it didn't feel good to all the kids who were in class with me, who failed out of their other schools at second grade. We need honesty, right there, because there still are academics out there at our universities and elsewhere who like to wish away this problem, who still are kind of beholden to kind of whole language and balanced literacy ideals, and they're debunked. We need people to raise their voice. We wouldn't allow for a professor of biology to preach creationism. We can't allow for professors in early childhood literacy to pretend that dyslexia doesn't really exist, or that, actually we're going to just pepper in a little bit of phonics, or we're going to pepper in a little bit of phonemic awareness, or we're going to pepper in, and we're not going to create a structure because this feels better, or because this seems right. And I don't want to, look, I'm not an academic. I'm not an expert teacher. You guys are. I'll let you figure that out, but we do need truth and we do need honesty. And I think the governor gets that. I think David Banks gets that. I think we need to hold up, and we need to, the people who were doing this work, like the two of you. I remember the teachers who helped save my academic career and save my life. We got to hold those people up, and we got to let those people have the floor now, because there were a lot of people who were selling snake oil who got a lot of airtime for a really long time. They deserve to sit down and listen up to people who actually know what they're doing.
Lucy Calkins was at our conference today.
She sure was. But nobody was asking to take pictures.
So here's, drinking and seeing Lucy at the conference. I thought that was quite interesting. But
that was interesting.
But I think she's a brave woman, but I feel that's too nice to say to her. I think she still wants to sell products and other things.
That's the thing.
She should be run out of town. She's not the only purveyor of these bad ideas, but she sure as hell was the most successful at it. And she should be ashamed of herself. She made tens of millions of dollars screwing people over. And she's one of those people who, in the New York Times just 2 years ago, she said, 3-4% of the population is dyslexic. What are you talking about? And to that, I say, that's bullshit. And also,
thank you. You have to get a BS button.
And also, should 3 or 4% of kids get screwed over? Because that's what she was also saying. Well, if 3 or 4% of kids get screwed over, so be it. I've got my sports car and mansion.
Exactly. Thank you.
Wow, Bobby from Brooklyn is the real deal.
The real deal. He called it bullshit. BS. So anyhow,
moving on to take a BS button on a campaign trail if he's ever.
That's right. We'll get you one.
Send it to me. Love it.
So there are a couple of questions that people had asked me to ask you. And one was from Dr. Leslie Laud, your former teacher. I guess this was in your public school, Bobby, that Leslie was your teacher?
No, Leslie was, I believe, a student teacher at the time still, but at the Gateway School.
The Gateway School. Okay. All right. So she has a question. And by the way, she has a phenomenal writing program called Think SRSD. We saw her presentation.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Today.
Yep. And anyhow, Dr. Laud wants to know if New York plans to track gains in schools of the evidence-based initiatives. Will there be any data on core programs? I think that's a fair question.
It's a great question. So if we pass my Right to Read Act, yes, there is a reporting requirement in that. Also in the Dyslexia Task Force legislation that was signed into law, there is a report required by the task force to be published and made public, but it's not a reporting requirement for the individual school districts, even though I'm hopeful that inside that report, there'll be some details about what school districts are doing. In New York City right now, and you two might be able to better answer this than I know that they're trying to do, at least in some schools, tracking screeners. They're trying Dibbles and others to really do kind of 3 screeners a year to at least get a benchmark on children to figure out if they actually are in fact progressing. But one of the things, which is why I think we need real legislation. I mean, the governor's proposal is great, money is great, these things, but the legislation that I have, making sure that all of our school districts, and I think we have about 750 in New York, are reporting back to the state education department and telling them what they're doing with our kids for literacy, I think is really, really important, because I agree, why we need to codify this is because even though Lucy Calkins may or may not feel any shame and may or may not be run out of town, in 20 years, there'll be someone just like her.
Exactly. That's a good point.
And that's why need laws. And that's another thing, people who tell you that we're done now because David Banks and Eric Adams and Kathy Hochul have said a couple of nice things about evidence-based reading and have said a couple of nice and used the word dyslexia once, doesn't do anything. We don't have laws to enforce it. The unfortunate thing is we got a federal law, the Americans with Disability Act and the Individuals with Dyslexia Education Act, or Individuals with Disability Education Act, that have given some rights to children with disabilities who then use that as a cudgel against a system that wasn't wanting to, provide them services. But that's not a way we should actually do education. We shouldn't require parents to have an adversarial role with their local public school. That's terrible. And that makes people defensive, and it makes people, go back and retreat to their corners. So Leslie's 100% right. We need reporting standards, because then we'll know what's going on. And we'll say, why is the school district in Mineola doing this, and in Scarsdale doing that, and in Erie County doing this, and in New York City doing that? And that's important.
Judy, any thoughts on what you're hearing right now?
Totally with Bobby. I mean, Bobby has just really spoken a lot of my thoughts, and I'm just curious to see how is the New York legislation that's going to take place going to impact the city? Like, how do those two things merge together?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So, I mean, look, what the governor is doing, right? Got two things that she's suggesting, and it's, unfortunately, the state budget is super opaque and overly complicated, but right, there's some money for teacher training credentials, and then there's this mandate for curricula. If those stay in the budget, right, there will be these teacher training dollars, which will be doled out the way they're doled out. That becomes really how the sausages are made. The curricula standard should impact every single school district, because it's the state that sets the curricula. Now, the state has taken this laissez-faire approach, which used to say, well, local control, we kind of let you guys figure it out, dealer's choice. Now, we're basically the only state in the nation that does that. And it's not worked out super, super well. It doesn't mean that the state should be micromanaging every single school district, but we should be setting clear standards and what are approved curricula, so that parents can have an idea. And so, again, not to keep hawking my right to read bill, it lays it all out there, right? It lays it out in a systematic way that would require New York City public schools, as well as public schools throughout the state, not only to meet certain evidence-based curricula standards and have certain amounts of reading interventionists and professional development for teachers, which I think would make a huge difference. And again, look, it's priorities. We desperately need teachers. Teachers are the heart and soul of this. We need teachers to demand that the U of T and NYSET get behind stuff like this. We need teachers to demand elected officials to get behind this, because that will help get this done.
Bobby, can I ask you some hard questions?
Sure.
Ready? All right. So how do you, there's two questions that I have. How do you feel about the fact that they chose 3 curriculums in New York City? They chose Wit and Wisdom, HMH, which is into reading, and they chose expeditionary learning. How do you feel about the fact that there were 3 choices, which are all evidence-based, but have differences?
Yeah, look, I mean, again, I don't want to, I'm an advocate for literacy reform. I'm an advocate for evidence-based curricula. I don't want to pretend that I'm a teacher or a chancellor or an administrator. I've heard varying viewpoints. Somebody emailed just today with some issues around Wit and Wisdom, and I know that I think that's the most popular one chosen.
HMH is more popular in New York City.
It's more popular. Okay. What I think we're trying to do here is set standards for education experts, for chancellors, for teachers, for principals to be able to then work within. And, you know, I do want to make that clear. Look, I have some people who I think, you know, are true experts who, if I were mayor for the day or governor for the day or chancellor for the day, I would go to and say, look, I'm going to let you run the ball here. I do also know of some schools that have been able to get exemptions for curricula and programs that they've been using that are evidence-based, but weren't those three. So I do think I've seen at least a little bit of malleability and a little bit of flexibility by the DOE on that. Excuse me. But I think it's less. I think it's less about those three programs and more, do they meet the evidence-based standards and are they proven to help teach children to read? And then I would rely on all of you. I don't
Glad you said that. I'm so
That's
glad you said
good.
that because I'm doing some work here on Long Island in a district, and the program that we're using right now was something that came out of the UK, and it might not be on an approved list, yet you should come and see what these kids are doing.
What's the name of it? There's a school in my district that uses this UK curriculum that's amazing.
So it's Sounds Right, and it's a speech to print phonics, linguistic phonics program. Again, I'm not pushing a name. I'm just asking in terms of, you're talking about making sure that programs are doing what they should be doing. Yet this program might not be on an approved list. We're just hoping that that's not problematic in the future.
I mean, I know of at least one school where I was at, and I've done a literacy grant there where they also were using a curricula based out of the UK that was not originally on the approved list, that they were able to get an exemption. And so I do think that that is possible. And I know an example of it. I think the real thing that we need to make sure is that of those curricula, are they evidence-based? Are they sequential? Are they structured? Are they cumulative? You know, my only fear is that, right, there are folks like Lucy Calkins, like Fontes and Pinnell, who go and make small tweaks to this or that and say, we've met your standard. Keep the gravy train coming, New York City. Like,
I love you.
Babe, you're in love? You said the L word?
I am. I'm in love with you, Bobby, because I love listening to this. This is exactly what I've been saying for how long already. Keep the gravy train going. It's like, exactly. Let's stop this nonsense. Enough already. Last question that I have from a parent, and I know Judy's looking like she has something too.
I'm texting myself my questions so I don't forget them. I'm
okay.
excited.
There's a parent who you met, Bobby, in Albany, who's my client. I worked with both of her sons. Her question is, you know, there are these literacy plans that have been rewritten in certain districts that use sound bites, slogans. They say all the right things, SOR, evidence-based, yet it's essentially very similar with little tweaks here and there, but then the district might call it a comprehensive literacy plan, but they're not really changing all that much. Again, I think she wants to know, how are these types of things going to be stopped? I don't know how else to say it. She's just concerned that it looks like people are getting on board, but in the end, they're really not. Kind of what you said with Lucy, that they make these small tweaks, but it's not really these big changes.
Yeah, so I look, I think that this is the root of the issue, right? And the root of the problem with any big structure. I think it was Eisenhower who said it, but it might have been somebody else, but said, amateurs talk about strategy, experts talk about logistics. And I think he was referencing D-Day there. The look, the logistics are the fact is that it's the teachers, it's the administrators, it's the support staff, it's the principals, the vice principals, the literacy coaches. How do we get them the training? How do we require to make sure that they feel empowered to implement a program with fidelity, and that we don't, we allowed for, or schools allowed for, kind of whole language techniques to become a dogma, that you're not you're not a good teacher, or you're antiquated, or you're anti-child, or not, whatever. You're not, in places like me, in my area, you'd be like, you're not progressive. You're not, you're whatever. If you don't believe in this dogma, that was whole language, which I think then, turned our schools, and this idea of reading into some religious test that was absurd. Look, we have an end goal. Our end goal is to have kids learn how to read and then move on and do what they're going to do with their lives. And we need programs that actually have proven to teach non-readers how to read. And, especially children who needed that direct and explicit instruction. Not every kid who needs direct and explicit instruction is dyslexic. Lots and lots of other kids need it for lots and lots of other reasons. Show me what those programs are. Show me what your curricula is. Show me what's going on in a school to show progress. And then I think we can move on. And that's why we have a state education department. That's why we do have chancellors and school districts, because it shouldn't be somebody in Albany. We don't want a random assembly member or state senator telling you this is what we should do with literacy. It's that it is such a huge problem in New York and around the country that we've had to do that, and that's a tragedy. And so I think we have to come to terms with the realization of what's going on, prioritize, figure out what our actual priorities are in schools. If everything is a priority, we have no priorities. Figure out what the priorities are, and they can be different for different kids at different levels and at different ages. It doesn't have to be the same priority for all 12 years of schooling. And go forward. And again, look, I am a huge advocate for children with dyslexia and how we can be more compassionate and provide better educations for those children. But I also don't want to pretend that, everything that I had to go through is what every other kid has to go through. And so there is a mountain of evidence. I was listening to a podcast with Mark Seidenberg today. There's a mountain of evidence from Mark Seidenberg, from Doctors Bennett and Sally Shayowitz at Yale, to the, literacy hub at Yale and UConn, to a whole host of other people who, if you're just honest and open your eyes, they're going to lead you to the right way. I don't want to tell you which flavor one must choose, right? I think that's the problem, is that they act like, this is the only way. And I think that smart, dedicated, educated teachers, they want to teach kids, right? They want kids to be successful. And unfortunately, the dogma that so many of them were indoctrinated with, some kids succeeded because they were always going to succeed. And then they found ways to paper over kids' failure or pretend that kids were progressing. And, it's not a job of a teacher to rewrite, education policy on a school board level or citywide level or statewide level. That's unfair to tell, an individual teacher to do that or an individual principal. And so, here we are, tenacious parents. Nobody loves you like your mother. Your mother is going to stick up for you. Your mother's going to throw an elbow or two. That's what your client's mother is talking about. Like, am I going to have to be vigilant? Of course she is, because unfortunately, we've got to be vigilant for our kids.
Yeah. Judy, you wrote down your question.
Oh my God, there's 3. I'm gonna.
I'll be quick. I know I've been long-winded, but I'll try to be quick.
All right. All right. These are gonna be quickies. You ready to have some quickies with me?
Yes.
All right.
Oh, boy.
All right. Okay, so one of the points that I had were, what are we gonna do with waivers for high-performing schools? The other one was, what if the data looks crappy years down the line for the schools that have evidence-based curriculum? And then the third point was chancellors come and go. What are we gonna do with that?
All right, so let me start with the last one first. That's why we need laws. Chancellors do come and go. You have laws. That's why God created them. If the results look crappy, look, I don't know if they can get much worse than certain ones.
They can't
right?
get much worse, Bobby. They can.
So look,
I'm optimistic.
I don't think it's a panacea, right? I don't want to pretend. I get my own privilege, right? I got to go to some schools where they could zero in on a bunch of middle class to upper middle class to wealthy kids who, parents were doing everything under the sun to try to figure out, and they did create miracles and they did do miracles. But I get that that's different than a school where a kid is homeless and is facing those issues, or mom and dad are recent immigrants, don't speak English, work multiple jobs, and he or she's got to navigate the world by themselves. I get that there are those issues and a multitude of others. I think we've got to keep our eye on the prize, right? It's about teacher training. Teachers are our friends. It's about principals. It's about showing them right. I think the problem with this thing is, and I get it, if you meet little old me or you hear about little old me and you go, oh, this guy Bobby Carroll has been, spouting his mouth off for the last 8 years, telling people what to do. And you go, who the hell is he? I'm in this school every day. I don't want to hear from somebody in Albany or somebody at City Hall telling me what to do. I get that. I 100% get that. I think we've got a lot of education leaders who know that this is the right way to go. I think we need to stick with it because it's not going to happen overnight. Too many right people want to claim victory because it's good. It feels good. It's going to take years and years. But we have to start today. And I think slowly but surely, we will see changes in our schools. And look, we've seen them in places like Mississippi and Arkansas and Colorado and Missouri and a whole host of other places that have implemented them. And, even though, I went to some very privileged schools, the Windward School, the former headmaster there, Dr. J. Russell, great guy. He used to say, the only way you get into Windward is you failed out of every other school. And they have kids who go on to college to some of the most elite institutions in the country. And those kids were failing at school in first, second, third, fourth grade. So, the proof is in the pudding. I think it will eventually get there. It's not going to be tomorrow, but I think it will get there. And what was the last question?
High performing schools are schools that have quote unquote great grades on state test exams going to be able to waiver out. That's a concern that I definitely have.
Oh, that's a huge.
I think that they should get proctors in every school to make sure that the state exams are administered in a fair and equitable way.
So I don't know about the state exams, but what I can tell you right now is that is my biggest fear, is that schools in wealthy districts in New York City and elsewhere opt out and continue on with whole language curriculum, not because, I want to, rub it in their face. Look, but because unfortunately in our society, human beings are human beings. And so many people look at places like Park Slope, Brooklyn, Chelsea, Scarsdale, wherever, which were some of the biggest proponents of whole language, and said, what do they have? Because I want it, because they must be doing something right. Look at how big those houses are. Look what mom and dad do. Look at those test scores. So let's just adopt whatever they do, and it must be Shangri-La. It must be perfect. The little dirty secret that nobody told you was that mom and dad taught those kids how to read so often. Mom and dad got tutors and didn't tell anybody, or mom and dad sued the DOE when, Bobby was dyslexic. And they don't say that to anybody. And so we have this giant, giant problem that our wealthy public school children have so many other interventions provided for them. And people assume that their schools are the best, not because there's some specific quantifiable reason, but because they just look at the kids and they see how successful they are. And that's unfortunate. And so I think that, so I think they need to adopt it. And look, I come from a relatively well-resourced area. There's a lot of well-resourced schools. There are still 15-20% of kids failing those exams. Why? And look, I'll tell you, I think a lot of those kids have dyslexia and they haven't been diagnosed or been given the proper supports. But of course, a lot of those schools still don't use evidence-based curriculum. And if you're okay with 15-20% of the kids not learning how to read, what if that was your son or daughter, right? We should not be writing these kids off.
That's right.
Say
that all the time.
And so, it's really clear. Like and I got it when I first got elected. I went to schools. I was less politic than I was even today, and I would say things that were controversial sometimes, and get myself into trouble. But I would have been one of those kids at a well-resourced school, and you go, well, look, he's doing fine. He's plodding along, and look, the school's got great. I don't know what the problem is. The school's got great test scores. I guess it's just Bobby's fault. And it's like, no, the kid probably has a phonological awareness. So sure, know what else is going on. And also, look, direct and explicit instruction. It's good for the goose. It's good for the gander. It saved my life. The teachers I had changed my life. And I was very, very lucky. And I know that we can do that for so many other kids. And, New York City is the greatest place still to be born and the greatest opportunity that so many people will be given. But if our school system doesn't teach you how to read, all that potential that we've got throughout our city, is taken from you. And that's terrible. I'm really happy that Governor Hochul, that Mayor Adams, the Chancellor Banks have started this journey. It's far from over. And I'm really glad that both of you invited me on and humored me a little bit. And thank you for doing what you guys are doing, because I think more of this knowledge and real experts like yourselves who actually go out and teach people how to read, make all the difference. And so thank you. My mom did that. It's really, really important, because that's real work versus me. I just kind of advocate for some stuff and see how it goes.
The full name of our show is The Literacy View, Real Teachers Letting Loose. So we are all about the real deal. And you are, Bobby Carroll, the real deal. I mean, anybody listening to this has to walk away saying, wow, what an impressive man. So to finish up, here's my quickie. Are you going to run for president one day?
Oh, I knew it was coming. Oh my God. Wait, let me take a drink of water.
Look, Faith, why would you want me to ruin my life? That seems like not a very fun job. Let's see. Look,
we need you. We need someone young, smart, gets it. Somebody who really, I don't care what party, we need somebody like you. Honestly.
That's very kind of you. Look, I like my role right now. Who knows what the future holds? It's a long run, but it's very flattering, and we'll see.
Okay, I hope you change your Twitter handle from Bobby for Brooklyn to Bobby for President, and I'll
wow
on that. So Thank you so much for being here. This was amazing. Judy, tell everybody how they can get in touch with us and we'll wrap up.
Find us on Facebook. Join our group, The Literacy View, Real Teachers Letting Loose. Follow us on Instagram, at The Literacy View. Follow Faith on Instagram at High Five Literacy. Follow me at Boxner Judy. Follow us on Twitter. Faith is at High Five Literacy. Follow me at Boxner Judy. Please, please, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, The Literacy View. We're also on Buzzsprout, on Apple, Spotify, we're everywhere. Please like us and share us with your friends. We're counting on you. That's the biggest compliment you could give us, is by retweeting and sharing and writing us good reviews. And we want to hear from you. We always post our email address on different locations as well. So write to us. Tell us what you're thinking.
This was such a great show. Thank you so much for being here. Assemblymember Robert Carroll, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll be in touch.